everyone, this is Sam Black with Drafting Archetypes, and today I'm going to be talking about blue-black in MH3. As always, the notes are available at patreon.com/draftingarchetypes. Getting into it, blue-black has about an average win rate. The win rates in this format are pretty flat, with the exception of red-white and red-green, which overperform. Everything else is kind of in the 53 to 57% win rate on 17 lands. Blue-black is in the middle there, 55 and change, basically just like the same as an average 17 lands drafter. It's a fine archetype, it's nothing special, it's not bad. The commons you're looking for are basically just removal and card draw. The best performing being Demon Furier. Demon Furier being the top performing common in blue-black is notable because it is not drafted that way. It goes later than other hard removal spells, and it plays really well in blue-black. The ability to do a card draw into a 1-mana removal spell on any size creature or whatever is a pretty big swing. So very important to be aware that Demon Furier is the top common in blue-black right now. It's not necessarily the best overall, but I think you give up a lot of value if you're not prioritizing Demon Furiers, and if you're not seeing the table doesn't value this as a sign that it's going to be a good time to be blue-black. Just a lot of the value that you can get at the table is literally just because of getting several Demon Furiers with relatively late picks. So getting back to top commons, Demon Furier, Breathe Your Last, Demon Furier, I should probably say what cards do before talking about them for that long. 3 and a blue sorcery, put a creature online permanent? I'm not sure. On top of second from the top of its owner's library or on the bottom, costs 1 less for each card you've drawn this turn, non-land permanent. It reads at a glance you'd think it's a 4-drop that costs less, but it's a sorcery and you have a draw step, so it's a better time ebb as a baseline. It's 3 mana to put something on top, and then if you've drawn 2 cards, it's only 1 mana, 1 card, and it's 2 mana. So can be pretty cheap, very versatile. Breathe Your Last is BB1 instant. Destroy target creature or planeswalker, gain a life for each of its colors. Eviscerator's Insight is the 2 and a black, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 card, creature or artifact. Again, not sure. Draw 2 cards, flashback, 4 and a B, instant. Wither and Bloom, the 1B, target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn, and then you can exile it from your graveyard for 1 and a B to put a counter on a creature, a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Serum Visionary, the 3 mana 2/2 that Serum Visions when you cast it, draw 1, scry 2. Scurrilous Sentry, the 4 mana 2/3 ETB or attack connive. This is another one that is just a lot stronger than it looks at first glance. You look at it, and it also has menace. So you look at it, and it's a 2/3 with menace and connive, and 4 mana 2/3 is not very good, but it connives right away. So then it basically is a 3/4 right away, gives you some selection, and then if it lives and attacks, and you discard non-lands both times, then it's already a 4/5 menace by the first time it's attacking, which is a pretty good rate for 4 mana. And then if you're getting value out of the connives, either because it's additional draws or because you're discarding something valuable or you're just fixing your hand, it's better than that. And it makes it a lot easier to trigger the draw 3 stuff. It doesn't do it by itself, but if you have another connive or a cantrip or a looter or a Serum Visionary or whatever, then that gets you to 3. So helps make everything work here. Then Sneaky Snacker, the blue-black 2/1 flyer that returns from your graveyard to play tapped when you draw your third card in a turn, and Unfathomable Truths, the 4 and a blue instant draw 3, make an Eldrazi spawn. That's kind of the top tier of commons in blue-black. Good news for blue-black is a lot of its best commons go pretty late. Demon Furier, Eviscerator's Insight, Scurrilous Sentry, and Sneaky Snacker all usually go later than 8th pick. Demon Furier and Eviscerator's Insight both have like really, really good win rates for how often they're drafted, so there's a lot of value to be gained there. Eviscerator's Insight is a particularly important card for this deck in a lot of ways. It isn't very highly valued by any of the other archetypes, though it can work in like some of the other decks, like black-red might have some germs or whatever, and white-black might have some random tokens it's interested in sacrificing, but it's kind of like the card's not as good as something like Deadly Dispute, and like Flashback's not as good as Making a Treasure, but in blue-black, the flashback's actually really valuable because you're playing a long game and you're looking for more things that trigger having drawn your third card in a turn, and this one card does it twice. And twice is actually like a lot of times over the course of the game for some of these effects. Like, looking at trophy decks, getting ahead a tiny bit, looking at trophy decks, a lot of the blue-black decks that trophy only have like 4 or 5 cards that give them a clean way to draw 3 cards in a turn. And so, like, one of those being one that works twice is, like, appreciably increases how many times total in the course of a game you're likely to trigger your draw your third card stuff. And then the fact that it's such a clean combo with Sneaky Snacker just makes it a really good fit. Gives you like the card advantage that you want at a better rate than some of the other card draw, and with no real disadvantage if you're sacrificing a Sneaky Snacker. And then the fact that the interaction between Eviscerator's Insight and Sneaky Snacker is kind of like the cornerstone of like the blue-black commons in this archetype in a lot of ways, means that you're looking for more good ways to use Eviscerator's Insight, which means that you're interested in sacrificable creatures. So, like, retrofitted Transmogrant, the black 1/1 that you can return from your graveyard for 3 and a black, and it comes back tapped with 2 counters, 2+1/+1 counters, is pretty good in the blue-black deck because it works well with Eviscerator's Insight and also like a Cursed Marauder, the 1 and a black 2/1 ETB, both players sacrifice a non-land creature. And so Transmogrant just kind of like gives you some like glue to make some of your other stuff that's kind of ideally trying to work with Sneaky Snacker, work when you don't find your snacker. And then it also just kind of is a reasonable like late game threat when you're doing your kind of, you know, card draw removal attrition plan. So Transmogrant's something to watch for here that can kind of like smooth out your various interactions. Like, again, Scurrilous Sentry, for example, is pretty happy to discard something that wants to be in your graveyard, like a Transmogrant or a Snacker. So there's like more overlap and utility there. Let's see, that's kind of a lot of what I think is going on with the commons. Often asked, what cards should you look for to like put you into this archetype? And the answer is basically that blue-black is the best controlling black archetype. I think black-red is pretty firmly aggressive, and white-black and green-black are probably generally going to be proactive mid-range decks, whereas blue-black is like solidly controlling. You have some tempo starts with your like aggressive snacker draws or whatever, but you're looking to play a control game more than most decks in this format. And so there are some black rares in particular that fit that very well. So, for example, Abomination is a very, very good card. That's the 4 BB 5/5 ETB, exile a random card from your hand, the top card of your opponent's deck, and a random card from their graveyard, and then you choose any one of those to cast for 3, and it has Emerge from Artifact, 5 BB. That part doesn't come up so much, but it's kind of like a 6-mana 5/5 that makes them discard a card at random, and then also casts a pretty good spell for free. It's a lot of value. It's a very good card. It moves from a 63.4% win rate across all decks into a 57.4% win rate in blue-black, so a little bit more than a 4% increase, which suggests, that if you first pick a Abomination, which is something that you should look to do if you open it, blue-black is a pretty good place to try to end up. Similarly, Tamamo, the flip planeswalker that I'm not going to try to get all the text on, it moves from like 63% to 63.3 to 66.5% in blue-black. So again, a very good rare that moves up to a great rare in blue-black. Psychic Frog, powerful blue-black rare. Obviously, that's going to put you in blue-black. Marionette Apprentice, I mention among these rares because it has the highest win rate in blue-black among all cards that are not the 3 that I just mentioned. So, not a rare, but it's a card that you should take very highly that is happy in blue-black. Happy in other places too, but, blue-black is really looking for those, easy, cheap things to sacrifice, and has some aggressive draws with the snackers, and thanks to snacker you can have stuff like dying and coming back a lot. So Marionette Apprentice, the 2-mana 1/2 fabricate that makes your opponent lose life when a creature artifact you control dies, plays very well in blue-black. And then also Toxic Deluge is another card that's kind of mediocre, good common level, 57.8% game and hand win rate overall, but moves up to 63.2% in blue-black. So another card that gains, 5 or 6% if you're in blue-black because the control space is so good for it. And then Opiamancer is another just very good black rare. That's the 2/2 that makes a 1/1 death touch each upkeep if you don't already have a snake. And that, again, is about 3% better in blue-black than it is overall. So basically the answer is if you open a blue or black card, especially a black card that wants to be in a control deck, then that would be a good time to kind of look to try to position or move into blue-black if it's open. The top uncommons, small list: Marionette Apprentice, Depth Defiler, the 5-mana 3/5 Eldrazi that when it enters, target player draws 2, discards 1, or you bounce a creature, or you can kick it for a colorless to do both. This is a clean way to trigger the draw 3 without, experiencing a lot of negative tempo. So it's a very good fit here. And then Brain Surge, 2 and a blue, draw 4, put 2 back on top. Those 3 uncommons perform appreciably better than the other uncommons, and the rest of the uncommons are kind of, about as good as the good commons in blue-black. So not really exceptional except for those 3. So I talked about how Visator Insight, is kind of the price. I think it's the main card. It's not like it's super important or goes in every blue-black deck, but I think it's kind of the card that gives blue-black its most unique identity in this format compared to other formats, because it goes pretty late, it's pretty high impact, and it asks for some pretty specific considerations in deck building that other card draw spells wouldn't. And so that's kind of where you get this control deck that still wants a lot of cheap creatures and that really values having, recurring fodder and stuff like that. So I think just kind of when conceptualizing blue-black, you really want to pay attention to positioning yourself to take advantage of Visator's insights that you see in the draft, which otherwise wouldn't be an obvious thing to be doing when you're just kind of drafting a blue-black control deck. I mentioned that most blue-black decks, the trophy that I looked at, only have around 4 or 5 cards that like are draw 2 or mores that trigger the sneaky snackers coming back and your mindless conscriptions amassing 3 again and stuff like that. I would kind of expect that like 4 to 5 is like a minimum to make those cards really kind of work. But the fact that I kept seeing decks that only had 4 or 5 when looking at trophy decks, I suspect that people are sometimes playing appreciably more than that, and it's probably not going well. I think the format's too fast to go really, really far out of your way to fill your deck with cards that draw 2 more, and like those get clunky fast, and you need like efficient removal to support them. And so I think you're really supposed to be prioritizing the efficient removal over the stuff that gives you those draw triggers. And then, you play a long game, you're going to chain those things together. You're not going to need that many of them in your deck to like get value out of your mindless conscriptions and stuff. Mindless conscriptions, the black 2 enchantment that amasses 3 when you draw your 3rd card. So you can get away with like a little bit of a light touch on that stuff is what I'm getting at. And on that note, Kami of Jealous Thirst, the 3-mana 1/3 death touch that can drain your opponent for 2 for 5 mana, but it costs 5 mana less, so it's free if you've drawn 3 cards. It's not bad. It has a slightly above average win rate. I like the card, but it stands out as having a low win rate for how much it's played. And I think that's because you kind of imagine like, oh, this is the thing my deck's doing. I'm just going to drain them for free every turn. And really, most of the time, you don't get to drain them for free. You'll get to drain them a few times. It's a solid card, but you shouldn't be thinking of it as, oh, this will just drain them for 2 every turn or something. So it's still like a good blocker, good defensive card, and like every part of the drain effect is like pretty valuable for the deck. But you want to be realistic about how often you're triggering it, I guess. Fetid Gargantua is another card I want to draw attention to, because when you put a counter on it and you draw 2, you'll trigger your draw 3 stuff. But notably, it performs really poorly in blue-black, which I think is just a function of it being too clunky. 5 mana is a lot for a 4/4. The life loss is like pretty impactful. This, I think, is a good example of the kind of thing where like you want to just be comfortable with your like 4 or 5 ways to draw 2 cards being good enough. Don't go out of your way to fill your deck with everything that might let you trigger it. You generally want to pass on this one in favor of cheaper cards. Porage Shadow Spinner is an important card to mention. This is the 1 blue-black 2/3 death touch that draws X, discards X, Rexes its power when it attacks. Very clean way to trigger your draw 3 stuff. You just attack with it. And the lifelink is pretty valuable for a control deck. The win rate's not great. It has a lower win rate than Scurrilous Sentry, for example. It's just like a little bit small. It's hard to find good attacks with it. Most of the other creatures that, cost a similar amount are 3/3 or bigger. Yeah, it's kind of like Kami of Jealous Thirst. I think it actually has a pretty similar win rate, where it's not like it's a bad card, you're fine playing it, but this should never be the card that's putting you in blue-black. It's like not a signal or like, it's a reward for being blue-black, and it's not like a big reward. It's just like a fine playable that no one else is going to want that like you can put in your deck. Don't treat this as like a premium uncommon or reason to get into blue-black or any of that. Cursed Marauder is worth mentioning. I brought it up a little bit earlier. That's the 2/1 that makes both players sacrifice a non-token creature. Again, just because of Eviscerator's Insight, you're kind of building your deck to support this anyway. Good with Snacker, good with retrofitted Transmogrants. Also, if you just don't have another non-token creature on 4, you can play it and then put its trigger on the stack and sacrifice it to an Eviscerator's Insight before the trigger resolves. and that can cover your creature for the insight. Not an amazing turn, but solid if it comes up. Note, if you're doing that on Arena, you're probably going to need to enter full control to make it happen. That's kind of it for individual cards. Just kind of stepping back to big picture. I touched on this a little bit, but you're, mostly like a traditional control deck, except again, because of, your signpost common that you will often have like 2 to 4 copies of when this archetype is open, being a 2/1 flyer for 2 that your opponent doesn't really want to use removal on, you can end up playing like a pretty legit tempo game some portion of the time. And the thing is, like, the Sneaky Snacker's quite bad at racing. Like, 2 isn't a ton of damage, and you don't have a lot of support for it. If you're against an aggressive deck, like, you're never going to win a race. And you're not really going to kill your opponent before they get to execute their endgame very often. But getting them in range, can give you some easier wins, can help you end the game before some of the Eldrazi decks do some really crazy stuff. Again, like, I don't think it's like the early beats are very transformative for how the deck functions. I think you mostly want to be drafting it as kind of a pure control deck. But it's nice that you're going to, like, get your opponent low early some portion of the time. So, yeah, that's basically what I have to say about blue-black. Overall, I don't think that this is an archetype that you should force. I think there's, opportunity here because a lot of the good commons aren't taken early, but you also kind of need them to be opened in the right seats in the right quantities. And, you're a control deck. You're going to be a lot better off if you have some good rares. It's also kind of like difficult to be a control deck in this format, which is why you kind of like need rares and you need some stuff to go right. And you need like the fact that the deck can do some aggressive stuff to help overcome some of the like weirder angles you'll be attacked by and stuff like that. So, it's an average deck, like I said at the beginning. There are going to be some very good builds of it. It's not something that you should avoid, but it's also not something that you should be forcing. You should draft it when the cards fall that way, but not really more than that. And that's going to do it for my opening thoughts. So now I'm going to turn it over to chat for questions. But first, I want to thank the newest patrons over at patreon.com/draftingarchetypes. So thank you, Sam and I Am a Cat. If anyone else is looking to support the program, be sure to check out, again, patreon.com/draftingarchetypes. So, seen some mention here about Buried Alive. I think Buried Alive is pretty good if you have 3 or more Sneaky Snackers. You can, get Transmogrant as a backup, but mostly you're going to want to be putting Snackers in your graveyard. And you're also going to want, to be on the high end of that, like 4 to 5 ways to trigger your Snackers type range. Buried Alive is 3 mana. You put the Snackers in the graveyard. You probably don't get them back that turn. And then you need to spend mana to get the Snackers back, and then they're entering tapped. So, like, the Buried Alive plan is really slow. If kind of the best case is if you have Porage Shadow Spinner, and then you can go turn 3 Shadow Spinner, turn 4 Buried Alive attack, put all the Snackers into play. That's gonna make the like slow issue a lot less bad. So I'd say, like, the Buried Alive thing is cute, potentially powerful, gonna have some good matchups. But it's also going to be like really, really bad if you're in like the clunky version of it against an aggressive deck. So keep it in mind, but like don't go crazy over it. No mention of Mindless Conscription. Should it be included or not? I mentioned it a few times as like a payoff for the stuff. it's a good card. It's not, there are a lot of uncommons that I didn't touch on because they're not like, this is a great first pick. They're like about as good as the good commons for the archetype. I think Mindless Conscription is in that space. It's like a good card, but it's not something that I think you should like first pick and go blue-black because of it or anything. What's the correct amount of sneaky snackers in this deck? Well, I think you just want as many of them as you can like easily get, but I think that you often want to like plan to table them. A lot of the effects that care about drawing 3 will happen on your turn. Like a lot of them are instants that only draw 2. So how do you value counter spells in this space, given that like a lot of your instants are kind of like pushing you to play at sorcery speed? I think the answer is that I don't value counter spells very highly, but a lot of that's because there aren't really a lot of counter spells available to value highly. There's like the Aether Spike that, the deck's not great at generating energy, and the card's kind of awkward against Eldrazi spawns anyway. I don't think it's a very good fit for the deck. I don't value it very highly. I think, as far as counter spells go, Flare Denial is like the best one for the deck because, sometimes you'll have the mana for it and sometimes you'll be fine casting it for free. Overall, I don't think countering spells is like a big part of what's happening in blue-black. If you're more often using a Visator's Insight main phase to trigger draw 3 or holding it up against removal, I'd say in blue-black you're probably more often using it to trigger the draw 3, but that's only going to be true when you have an actual payoff for it. So I think it's going to be pretty clear about which one of those things you're doing most of the time. Where do you rank Deep Analysis compared to Eviscerator's Insight? I have found Deep Analysis to seem pretty clunky. 4 is a lot of mana up front, and 3 is a lot of life to pay. I would generally expect Eviscerator's Insight to be a better card, though I didn't directly compare the stats of those. What are my thoughts on the 3B lose 3 life tutor guy? I think it's fine. Grim Servant. 3 is a meaningful amount of life, but it is, a nice, 2-for-1. The body's a little bit, it's, I guess I kind of think of it as a worse Serum Visionary that's better if I have really good 1 and 2 mana spells. One thing I didn't talk about splashing, and I think that Galvanic Discharge is the card you're most likely to want to splash by a lot. That's the red common energy lightning bolt thing. And so, if you're splashing Discharge, then I think Grim Servant gets appreciably better because of being able to find a good 1 mana removal spell. But also, just if you have some, premium 1 and 2 mana cards in general, it's a bit better. On splashing in general, I think that being a control deck, you are relatively splash friendly. However, I found the deck to be notably pip intensive, largely because of Psychic Frog, which it's weird to mention a rare, but because it's a blue-black rare, a disproportionate amount of the time that you're in blue-black, it's because you've seen that, or it's more likely to get passed to you. I see it go kind of late in packs 2 and 3 sometimes. So between Psychic Frog and Sneaky Snacker, splashing doesn't feel free. And also, there aren't that many cards that I'm all that excited about splashing. What do I think are the good or bad matchups for the deck in the format? I don't have enough experience to say with any confidence whatsoever. And honestly, I think it's going to depend on your exact build of the deck. If your removal lines up correctly against their creatures versus if you have the wrong removal for their creatures, it's going to be a huge difference, right? If you have a lot of Wither and Blooms, then you're going to perform better against red-white aggro, whereas if you have more Demon Inferiors and Breathe Your Lasts, then you're going to do better against some of the Eldrazi decks and worse against the energy aggro decks. When drafting, how do you evaluate whether you should splash if you're primarily blue-black, if you don't have much removal or rewards in other colors? Mostly it's just going to be about did you see some really good card to splash more than anything else? I guess when I'm saying that I don't really recommend splashing in blue-black, it's more that there aren't that many commons that I think are good to splash. Like, I think outside of Discharge, it's hard to see like what common I'd be happy to play on a splash in blue-black. And so then it's just like, did I see the rares at a point in a draft where I can start like reasonably looking for like lands to make them easy to cast? Do I think this deck is best as a control deck, or have I seen any more tempo-oriented versions? I think it's best as a control deck. Like, your best cards are removal and card draw, and while you have some like backdoor tempo game plans, I don't think that those are well positioned to like race any of the aggro decks or even really like compete with them on that axis. Is it worth splashing the red-black uncommon that gets a creature back and deals damage to something? I don't know. Like, it's an additional removal spell and card advantage, but it's not like card advantage that contributes to your draw extras triggers, and it's like a little bit clunky as a removal spell, and you kind of have other ways to get card advantage. It doesn't seem like something I'd be excited about. What do I think of Kappa Caner in blue-black? Is it possible to run while having both artifacts and draw 3, or would it be a different space? I think Kappa Caner, the blue affinity rare that's kind of out of place in the set because blue isn't really doing artifacts, is best splashed in a red-black deck by quite a bit. I could imagine a deck that is technically only blue and black that's basically like playing mostly like the black artifact commons that go in the red-black deck and trying to function very differently from most blue-black decks. But I think if you're going to play black-red, you should just play black-red instead of playing black-red with islands instead of mountains. And like splashing Kappa Caner is pretty easy. Yeah, I think a lot of the late games are just, well, I've assembled the game has gone on long enough that I've found all 3 or 4 of the snackers in my deck, and I've been able to kill all of your like big reach creatures, and so like these things end the game in 2 or 3 hits or whatever because I got some hits in early. On that note, I should probably mention, because it's me, Tamam meets the Story Circle. This is a card that does very poorly in this set. Like a 50% win rate overall, goes up to like a 52% win rate in blue-black, which should be like the best case for it. This kind of card always has bad win rates. Witness the Future, one of my favorite cards of this sort, a card that I would basically never pass, that I did very well with, still had a really bad overall win rate. Most of the time, I don't trust win rates on cards that let me loop my deck. I assume that I will use it differently than most other players, and I should continue valuing it highly. Tamam meets the Story Circle feels difficult in this format. It's not impossible. Every now and then I'll draft a deck that wants it, but I do think it's actually worse in this format than it is in a lot of the formats that have cards that let you do it. And I don't think that blue-black in general should be looking to play the loop your deck game plan that I would have been happy playing in like LCI, Lost Caverns of Ixalan, with Hoverstone Pilgrim. I just think the format makes it very difficult, and the format doesn't make it that hard for blue-black to like close a game. So there are versions of blue-black that I think can play Tamam meets the Story Circle, but you're kind of playing it like for value more than like to hard loop your deck. Like, you're playing it because you think that discarding, like shrinking your opponent's guys for a turn and then discarding cards to make clues sounds like a good thing to do, which most of the time it isn't. I kind of touched on this earlier, but I'm going to touch on it again a little bit more directly. Do you think one of the strengths of blue-black is it being underdrafted and thus getting solid playables on the wheel? That was something that I talked about toward the beginning of this, that yes, a lot of what's going on here is that several of the best commons for the deck go later than 8th on average, so you can like table your premium stuff, especially Demon Inferior being underrated. But also, to the larger point, I don't know that blue-black is underdrafted. I think that blue-black is likely appropriately drafted, and the cards generally should go as late as they go. And that, like, being able to get them late is... It's not like there's something... It's a necessary part of the deck being playable, which is going to be true for most archetypes, right? Like, most of the time, it's bad to be in, like, an average archetype that isn't open at the table. So, like, if you're not the only one, it's going to be hard for you if someone else is looking for the same cards, unless it's one of the strongest archetypes. So, like, a table might be able to support 2 white-red decks because, you know, there's a really wide range of white and red cards that they're happy to have, whereas blue-black is looking for a narrower range of the blue and black cards that exist. So, in that way, a table's not going to support as many people. So, it's, you know, it's kind of weird to me to think of it as one of the strengths, in that, like, that strength exists because the color combination is weak enough that it can and should play out that way. So I see it more as like a baseline but necessary functionality of kind of any of the less, like, the decks with like slightly lower raw power. They all kind of, you know, they don't play well if you find yourself competing with 1 or 2 other players at the table for the same archetype. But if other people aren't in it, then they're going to be good. And that's going to be true, you know, in most formats with most kind of like average to below average power level decks. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up. So, thanks for tuning in, everyone. We're, you know, kind of solidly getting into the swing of MH3 here. The format's had a bit of time to kind of level out. You know, when the stats, for example, in 17 lands first came up, I mentioned that Writhing Chrysalis had just unprecedented stats for common, and I suspected that that wouldn't hold once players, you know, started valuing it more highly and it was harder to get several copies of them. That has happened. Decks do have fewer of them on average. The win rate has correspondingly dropped. You know, it's still like in the best of all time level common, but it's not, you know, better than every card in some sets level. And similarly, we're seeing the win rates kind of stabilize. You know, the Writhing Chrysalis deck, Chrysalis itself is great. Red-green is a good but not, like, broken archetype. So we've kind of moved past the, like, day one stages of the format into a format with a little bit of a healthier metagame. So I'd say a lot of my worst fears about the ways this format could end up playing out have not quite, you know, it's gone better than it could have. Format has stayed pretty interesting for me, so looking forward to continue covering it in the coming weeks and continue with Patreon polls going up early in the week for what I'm going to be talking about next. So have a good week, everyone, and I will see you next week. Bye for now.
Prepare for light speed.